Hello, Tech fans, and welcome into the latest edition of the Tech Sideline Podcast. We are recording live on Monday, November 18th. Whether you're watching or listening, live or archived, we're so glad that you could join us today. Again, recording on Monday, November 18th. We've got a lot to get to today. We're going to be recapping what was a busy weekend in Tech athletics, highlighted by a 45-0 win for Virginia Tech football over Georgia Tech. We're going to talk a little wrestling. The Hokies go on the road, knock off number 3 Ohio State. Updates on men's basketball, women's basketball, recruiting, and football. So much to get to today, and again, we're glad you're with us on the Tech Sideline Podcast. I'm your podcast host, Evan Hughes. I've got Will Stewart to the left of me, sitting over there in the middle chair today.
So every time I know there's a camera on me, I want to go like that. I don't know why.
And again, we're glad everybody could join us today. For those that are watching live on Facebook, a reminder, start dropping those questions. We've got Malcolm Stewart behind the scenes producing. He'll take your questions. We'll get to them towards the end of the podcast. A reminder that this week and every week, the TSL Podcast is presented by the Fisher Law Firm, Virginia's trusted DUI and traffic defense firm, dedicated to defending individuals charged with traffic-related offenses. From their offices in Blacksburg and Roanoke, the Fisher Law Firm handles cases throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. To date, the firm has defended more than 30,000 people charged with moving violations. For a free consultation, call anytime, day or evening, toll-free at 1-800-680-7031. Again, that's 1-800-680-7031. Or you can email them at info@fisherlegal.com. Again, good morning to everybody. So glad that everybody could be with us. Will Stewart, Evan Hughes. Typically, Will, I start this off always asking how your weekend went. But I have a feeling of where you're going. And so I want to start the podcast off with this because Will is a proud father this weekend.
That doesn't mean we just had a baby.
I asked Malcolm to pull this picture up, which is currently Will's Twitter background on Twitter, Will Stewart TSL. A special weekend for the Stewarts, as the Roanoke Times says, and the headline of the article, Radford girls run perfect race to claim state title.
Very cool of you to bring that up. I wondered if maybe we should talk about it. First of all,
congratulations.
Let's back up a little bit further. It's a rough day for the Tech Sideline Podcast. Yep. Will Cam is out. So Will TV is out, not working today for whatever reason. We think we got a cable problem. Chris Coleman is out. And I called him. We start at 9:30, right? I called him at 9:27. He said, hello, I just woke up. So please mock him relentlessly when you on the message boards or in the comments or whatever. So it's a rough day, and there was something else. I forgot. I don't know. Anyway, let's get to that. Yeah, you are correct. That was so Hokie fans all had a good weekend. I had a particularly awesome weekend. I got up Saturday morning to go to the state cross country meet. My daughter's a senior, runs for Radford High School, and they won a state championship when she was a freshman at the 1A level. Very cool. They beat Auburn by 1 point, just as close as the races get. And then they moved up to Group 2A, and Maggie Walker dominates at Group 2A.
Private school from Richmond?
Yeah, Governor School.
Governor School, yeah, that's great. Actually, not a private school.
And so that wasn't happening her sophomore and junior year. And then her senior year, last year Radford finished 7th in the state, and 3 or 4 of the teams in front of them moved up to Group 3. The team that won the championship, Clark County, got gutted by graduation. They lost all their runners. So it came down to Radford, Glenver, and Floyd. And Radford got a runner back, Emma Hastings-Crummy, who's really good. She was out all last year. They had a good freshman come up. So it was just a thing where it came together. And they were favored to win a state championship. And we went and watched them Saturday at Greenhill Park in Salem, and they dominated. It was, as a parent, I tell my kids there's very little that happens in any given day that really is that big of a deal. Just do what you're supposed to do on a daily basis, and just plug and chug and keep going. But sometimes things come along that you only get one shot at it, and so this is her senior year. It's her final race running cross country, and Radford won easily. The Radford girls had 50 points, and Glenver came in second with 87. And Anna Lee, is my daughter, ran the best race I've ever seen her run. She PR'd personal. If you don't know your terminology, when somebody PRs, that's a personal record. Mm-hmm. She PR'd by over a minute.
Wow.
She broke 20 minutes for the first time ever, and it ran I think a 19:48 or something like that. And her PR before that was about a I think it was a 20:43. So what I'm saying is she went out there and just was out of her mind and ran the race of her life. And it was very cool. They got a nice article by Robert Anderson in the Roanoke Times.
Yep.
And our good friend John Fleming, who shoots for Tech Sideline. Of course, we have Ivan Morozov of Russian Hokie, and John Fleming also does a lot of photography for us. John has 2 kids who ran at Virginia Tech. So John's been shooting cross country for years and years.
It's a great picture.
So that picture right there.
And your daughter is in the middle?
She's the one in the middle, yep. She came in 8th. The girl to her right, our left, is Emma Hastings-Crummy. Emma came in 6th. Abby Barnes on the right came in 7th, and Annalise came in 8th.
So my favorite part of this article, and then we can move on.
So here's the article from the Roanoke Times.
So it's towards the end. It goes, quote, "The Radford seniors already had their plans for a celebration mapped out. Quote, hopefully going somewhere nice to eat," Graham said. And then, quote, "and a team sleepover," Stewart's added.
Yeah.
So, again, congratulations. I'm sure that was really special for you guys.
It was funny because Robert Anderson asked him, what's next? And whenever a reporter asks that, he means in the larger sense. And kids, all they're thinking about is what's happening, in the next hour or two. Well, I hope we could go out to some good dinner and have a team sleepover. Robert's like, yeah, I kind of meant,
like down the road.
You're going to run indoor track and outdoor track and run in college. That's kind of what I meant. But if you want to talk about dinner and a sleepover, that's great. So anyway, in addition to all the good stuff that happened with Hokie sports, very nice segue back into Tech sports. There you go.
There we go.
And Malcolm changes the picture right
well
on
done,
cue.
Malcolm. Appreciate that. Well, congratulations, Radford State champions.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Very cool.
And
so
Annalise, 2 in 4 years. Not many get to win one. So
and that's actually
exciting.
Radford's 5th championship in 7 years because they when she was a freshman, that was their 4th in a row, and then they skipped 2 years and then won this year.
She brought him back to glory before she graduated.
Oh yeah, it's all on her.
Well, listen. Without further ado, let's dive right into Will said what was a great weekend for Tech athletics. I walked into the office today. I looked at Will and said, "It was a really good weekend for Virginia Tech athletics." A week ago, it was great, right? Mike Young gets his first home win as a Hokie.
Right.
Bud gets the win over Wake Forest. And then wrestling knocked off Northwestern, the mat on the mound. This weekend, I mean, I don't know if you could have asked for much better.
That's 2 really good weekends in a row.
Yeah. Really, really. So let me kind of recap it. So Friday, the women's basketball picks up a win over a really good Liberty team that's underrated. Women's basketball 3-0.
Did you call that one?
I did not call. I was calling the first round of the NCAA tournament women's soccer game. That was the only thing that could have made it a perfect weekend.
Right.
Women's soccer hosted Xavier. Xavier scored a goal in the first 90 seconds and eventually held on 1-0. Yeah. But women's basketball picked up a win Saturday. Tech played Lehigh, and Lehigh won 20 games last year. No walk in the park, and they looked good in men's basketball. Landers Nolly had another terrific game. We'll talk about him a little bit later. Of course, football, which we'll dive into in just a minute. 45-0 win over Georgia Tech. I know we predicted Virginia Tech wins on the podcast Wednesday. I don't know if any of us thought 45-0 was coming. And then Sunday, maybe one of the underrated moments, and it's really not underrated, but it's the moment that maybe should get a lot of attention.
Right.
Virginia Tech wrestling going on the road to Columbus. For those that don't know, the Big Ten is such a dominant wrestling conference. Tradition, Iowa, Penn State, Ohio State. And they knock off the Buckeyes 21-15, maybe the biggest win in Virginia Tech history in terms of dual meets.
Yes, I think we previewed that on the podcast the other day, and I said that WrestleStat was predicting a 25 Tell you what, let's save that for later in the podcast.
Let's get that. Yep.
Because I do have some things to say about that.
We'll get to all of that towards the end. Plus, again, drop your questions on Facebook Live. Malcolm will take them down. We'll get to that.
Oh, by the way, that wrestling victory is on the heels of them signing the number 2 recruiting class in the country.
Wow.
So we'll talk about that.
Oh, we've got a lot to get to today. I can't wait. And speaking of recruiting, we'll get to some football recruiting in just a little bit. Hokies had a big weekend in terms of recruiting. So, without further ado, Hokies go to Atlanta. Have not beaten Georgia Tech since 2015, Coach Beamer's final year. A year removed from Georgia Tech coming into Blacksburg and breaking Lane Stadium rushing records on a Thursday night. Will, everyone's been talking about how the Hokies have been able to handle resilience and bounce back from that Duke game. Everyone's been wondering, can the Hokies play with success?
Can they handle success?
And right now, the answer to that question is yes. What, as a general question to begin, what do you make of the 45-0 win?
I was actually thinking, what am I going to say? Because I haven't even started writing my column yet for today, and I was thinking, what am I going to say? What do you say about such a dominant performance? You know, we've never been ones editorially here to lapse into cheerleading. So it's always a challenge for me. I know this sounds silly, I get it, but it's always a challenge for me to write about such a completely dominant performance without just writing 2,000 or 3,000 words of cheerleading. What do you make of it? My takeaway from it was, the offensive play calling was pretty phenomenal. Clearly, they'd seen something with the tight end. You know, just let's do the motion to the left. I don't know what football people call it, but let's just basically block to the left, fake the handoff to the left, peel around to the right, and, you know, run with one or two tight ends, and that just worked over and over and over. So the offensive staff saw something on film. But it wasn't just that. The jet sweeps were working. They even got a play out of the downfield passing game. I thought, as far as the blocking on the line went, I was watching the condensed version of the game last night. I didn't get a chance to really watch the entire 3-hour telecast. So I was watching the condensed version. And Virginia Tech executed very well in the red zone as far as scoring touchdowns. Several runs right up the middle. And on the runs up the middle, I kept seeing Christian Darrisaw just from the 5-yard line blocking into the end zone over and over and over. I saw Doug Nestor get some good blocks. To be fair, Darrisaw had a couple rough moments later in the game. Now, I do have in my notes, there's a play I consider kind of hilarious. I think it was a Trey Turner jet sweep, and the blocking on the perimeter was really good. And I don't know how many yards this was for Trey, 30, 40 yards, something like that. And when they're showing the replay, there's a field level camera kind of showing Trey coming at the camera. And in the background, you can see Darrisaw running, and he reaches over and he just pushes a defensive tackle. And that defensive tackle plows on another defensive tackle, and they both go down. And I'm like, so does Darrisaw get credit for a double pancake on that play?
Interesting. I wonder how they would score. Yeah.
So just so that's the offensive performance. Just, man, I think they wound up with something like 450 yards. It was weird. Do you have the stats in front of you?
I do. I have the box score.
How many first downs did Virginia Tech have?
Give me 1 second.
Not a lot.
Let me see. I'm looking at the individuals.
Yep, so
that would be on team. Let's see. First downs. Virginia Tech had 18 first downs. Georgia Tech had 8.
When you're scoring 45 points and you only have 18, only, quote unquote, how many yards, total yards and yards per play?
Let's see here. Virginia Tech rushing at a total of 238, passing a total of 223, which comes out to 461 total yards of offense. Georgia Tech 134 total.
Wow. So how many plays did Virginia Tech run?
They ran 61 plays for an average of 7.6 yards per play.
Yeah, that's up there. Typically, if you're getting, I think 5.5 to 6 yards a play, you're doing really well. So that's phenomenal. So over on the defensive side of the ball, I thought Bud brought pressure from a lot of places. One of the things I worried about going in was Georgia Tech has shown they are. I think James Graham, their quarterback, only had a completion percentage coming in of something like 47%.
Yep.
So what were his stats? Do you have them
He
there?
completed 50% of his passes for 43 yards, 2 picks.
Wow. So how many attempts? How many completions in attempts?
7 of 14.
7 of 14. So only about, are you telling me 7 yards of reception? So nothing downfield.
Right, which is what we talked about. The deep ball was going to be important to stop, but they didn't really execute that.
Right, and when they when they've done well offensively, they've hit a few deep plays. They got nothing. James Graham has been a problem scrambling. I think, if I remember, he only got like one good scramble off. So it's just a complete defensive performance, and there were some interesting things I saw from the defense. And I'm gonna cut these up with video and highlight them in my article today. I know this sounds random to pick this out of a completely defensive performance, but late in the game, Tech was playing a lot of backups.
Right.
I mean, Josh Fuga, however he pronounces it, Josh even got in. And that's when I learned that our roster's out of date. Josh is wearing number 58, and he's listed in our roster as 91 or something like that.
So if you want to talk about defense.
So wait a minute, let me get my thought out.
Yep.
Late in the game, Now, granted, Virginia Tech was teeing off at this point because Georgia Tech was way behind and they were just trying to pass. But there were some phenomenal plays made by Alan Tisdale and Dax Hollyfield. For a while there, I think probably the lion's share of the fourth quarter, Dax was at the Mike position and Tisdale was at the backer position. And Tisdale showed his strength, which is just pursuit and tackling to the perimeter. And even Dax, I think, and I'm going to highlight this in my article today, we got a glimpse of what Dax would look like at the Mike position. There was Georgia Tech ran a sweep or something, and he did the classic middle linebacker, Vince Hall, read the play, find the gap, and just mow the runner right down. I remember looking at that thinking, see, that's what Dax looks like at the Mike position.
Well, so I want to bring up a stat I saw on Twitter. This was from Cam Meller, who tweeted out lowest passer rating when targeted amongst FBS cornerbacks, minimum of 25 targets. So that's not a lot of targets if you think about it. Kind of going back to the thought we were talking about the deep ball for Georgia Tech, Caleb Farley is third in the country. When it comes to lower passer rating when targeted. 30.9. Only Al Blades Jr. of Miami, Florida, and cornerback from UL Monroe higher than him. Wow. So let's angle this from the 45-0 one. Let's start with the defense because we're talking about a shutout. In this day and age of college football with offenses and trending upwards, it's impressive to get a shutout regardless of who your opponent is.
So Georgia Tech had scored in 282 straight games. And there's a graphic that Ox on Twitter used to keep up on a regular basis. It was consecutive scoring streaks, and it's been a long time since I saw the infographic. But Virginia Tech is way up there in terms of number of games that they've scored in a row. I believe Virginia Tech's streak goes back to 1995 when Cincinnati beat them 16-0 in the second game of the year, and that has included some very dicey games.
Mark Leal.
Yeah, so we'll get to that. Right off the top of my head, Virginia Tech went up to Pittsburgh in 2001 and got stomped, 31-7, I think, and the 7 points came from a blocked field goal return for a touchdown. So they barely scored in that game. Miami beat them, I think, 30-6 back in 2014 or something 2014. Like that. And the Tech's lone score came with about a minute left to go. Mark Leal, backing up at quarterback, throws a touchdown pass to Isaiah Ford. So it is really difficult to have a scoring streak that long. And Georgia Tech this year extended that streak with a safety. They lost to somebody. They only had 2
Temple.
points. Temple. Was it 28-2?
Correct.
Yeah, they lost to Temple 28-2, and their only points were a safety. So I don't care how bad the team you're playing is. In this day and age, it's kind of like it's easy to go to a bowl game. Teams are going to put points up. So to end a 282-game scoring streak is pretty phenomenal.
Let's, continuing about the defense. Think about this for Georgia Tech. We've talked so much about how their rushing attack was really good, and compared to as Chris Coleman enters the podcast. What's going on, CC?
Oh man, I was tired. Now I'm not.
now he's well rested.
We're glad you're here. Listen, CC, I'm going to throw you right in here.
Okay.
Tech's
your
defense
microphone's bad.
Yeah, I know. But you got to flatten it out.
All right, I'll deal with it.
Yeah, just hold on to it.
Tech's defense holds Georgia Tech rushing 53 yards on the ground, 8 tackles for loss, pick 6 from Farley. How do you describe the defensive performance?
Oh, they were definitely tenacious. They were they're playing like they have something to prove, right? Like what Georgia Tech did to them last year, scoring 49 points. And I bet if we go back and look at the box score, Georgia Tech, they didn't run that many plays under Paul Johnson, because it was just a running offense and the clock was always running. So they probably scored 49 points on like 50 plays or something like that.
Something ridiculous like that.
I don't know how many plays they ran.
If only somebody had a computer in front of him and could look that up.
If only. Yeah. And compare it to how many plays they ran yesterday. They might have run a similar amount of plays in Saturday's game. Yeah. But I think I wrote that it was 2.9 yards per play.
Something
2.3.
It was really
They ran
low.
56 plays. Virginia Tech ran 61.
Okay, in last year's game?
Well, yeah, let's do last year's. I bet if you go back and I don't even want to know what last year's yards per play was.
Oh,
not as high as the Pitt game, and man, we'll get to that Wednesday.
We'll get to that Wednesday, but it's actually kind of a similar feel. But yeah, the defense came out with something to prove. They've been getting better week by week anyway. I mean, which is what you would expect from such a young defense. and a young team in general. But they really looked like they had something to prove against Georgia Tech. And even more than that, sometimes you go into a game against a team, you know you're better than them, and that could be a bad thing sometimes. But if you have the right mentality, it can be a good thing because you know you have an opportunity to just absolutely destroy somebody.
Georgia Tech ran 79 plays last year against Virginia Tech.
Really? That many, huh?
Only 47 for the Hokies.
What, do you have? Is it easily accessible how many yards per play they have?
5.9 yards per play. The Hokies actually 6.9 yards per play.
Yeah.
So last year it wasn't so much like Pittsburgh was hitting big plays last year.
Mm-hmm.
They averaged something like 13 point something yards a play, which there's some detail there, Evan, that I'm not sure you're familiar with. We'll get into it Wednesday. It's kind of interesting. But did you say 5.9 yards per play?
Correct.
I guess it was a bunch of 6, 7, 8 yard runs just over and over.
400.
Oh yeah. Tech just couldn't get off the field. I remember Virginia Tech could.
Georgia Tech couldn't get off the field either.
That's very true.
Picking up first downs.
Let me ask you guys this: Do you think that this game, given that it's been since 2015 that Virginia Tech beat Georgia Tech, was it personal, especially the way that things happened last year?
Okay, I'll answer that question. When you run a throwback to the quarterback, what were you up 28-0 at that point in time?
28-0.
And you're running gadget plays down near the goal line. It might be personal, but it could also be that Virginia Tech just wanted to put that on film.
Yeah,
and give other teams something to think about.
I think it's that because you're talking about a different coaching staff against Georgia Tech now.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. So when I would phrase it this way. I think Fuente gets fired up when he sees UNC on the schedule. He probably used to get fired up when he saw Paul Johnson on the schedule, not necessarily Georgia Tech. That's kind of the way I look at it.
Yeah, that's very valid. Let's also keep talking about the defense here. We talked about Alan Tisdale, 2 sacks, and how aggressive he was.
Yeah.
A couple of other names that stood out. First of all, Dax Hollifield has got 3 interceptions over the last 3 games. A pick in his last 3 games. I'll ask you about Dax. Just you talked about him playing the middle linebacker spot. He got some time there, but what it says about him as a player and his willingness to play a different position that we've talked about so many times on the podcast, and really has found a way to be in the right spot at the right time. I mean, he's been kind of Mr. on the spot the last 3 weeks.
Dax is, and I mean this in a good way. Dax he's been described to us as a football meathead. He just loves football. He loves to play it. He loves to practice it. He's old school from that standpoint. I worried about him earlier this year because I know he'd worked really hard in the offseason and lost a lot of weight and was trying to get better at the backer position. And he was still being exposed in space. And so I worried about him from that standpoint. He's still immensely popular with the fans. Did I catch – you remember he got his face bloodied. Which game was it where he got his face bloodied? I thought I read a quote from him somewhere where the training staff came over to wipe off the blood and patch him up. And he's like, no, I got to go make sure I get in some pictures or something like that.
Yeah, that was right.
So I think Dax went and found photographers to make sure that the blood running down. I mean, he's just so old school football, And I'm not smart enough to know. Like I said, I was worried about him at the backer position after about 3 or 4 games. His grades were bad. Just because, we've talked many times about how we thought he was playing out of position. I haven't seen that in the last 4 weeks or so.
Yeah, I'm not smart enough to know whether Bud has done something to cover him up,
right,
or if he's just gotten better. But anyway, it's working out. I do think he probably needs to take his defensive ends out for dinner for the interceptions.
Yeah. So Garbett was the one who forced
last week, and
it was Belmar this week.
That's right. I thought in his best play against the run actually came later in the game when he was playing Mike.
That's the one I was talking about, yeah. We were talking about it earlier before you got here. I was talking about that was the Dax moment at Mike where he found the gap and just slashed in. And that was a Jack Tyler type tackle.
It was a Rashard Ashby type play.
Yeah.
That's exactly what that guy does on a day-by-day basis. So totally different position for him. But, yeah, he's improved for sure. Tisdale had the Yates kid looking like Reggie Ball versus Xavier Adebe.
It's funny. I think I had that same thought. Yeah.
I meant to put that in my Sunday.
I'll steal it for today's because I had that same thought. I'm like, man, he's going all Xavier Adebe on the perimeter there, man.
Yep.
And the other one I want to bring up on defense, we haven't even gotten to the offense yet. I mean, this is how good some people stood out on defense. Chamari Connor was excellent on Saturday. He was all over the place. 2 tackles for loss, led the team in tackles with 7 tackles, all of them solo tackles, none assists.
Nice.
It's funny. Chris talked about how he wrote an article about how he was playing really well, and then he kind of went down a little bit, and now he's really on the upswing. Feels like to me when he's playing well and when he's bringing pressure, the defense is really clicking around him.
When he's healthy. Yeah.
Well, I also think Georgia Tech wasn't capable of exposing him in coverage.
Well, the thing they do the best offensively, except for giving the ball to Mason, as far as the passing game goes, is throw deep down the middle to the slot receiver, which he hadn't necessarily been exposed over the middle. It's been more on corner routes, but still, you would think that would be a spot of the field that they would have tried to attack. But I think it's easier when your cornerbacks, you can just lock down the other team's outside receivers and play Divine Diablo over the middle of the field behind your whip, and you just don't have to worry about that as much. Bud has so many more coverage options right now because he's got 2 lockdown corners on the outside. Plus, the middle of the defense, if you've noticed over the last 3 weeks, has gotten better in zone coverage.
Yeah.
That they were really having issues all of last year and the first half of this year with their zone handoffs, handing off one receiver to the next guy in coverage as guys are crossing the field and things like that. They've gotten a lot better at that, and we've seen the defense improve. From okay, solid, above average to really good since they've made that leap.
Yeah, I felt like earlier in the year a lot of guys were playing well, and we talked about this, but there were 2 or 3 weak spots you could pick at. You could get Dax exposed. You could get Reggie Floyd to make a bad fit every once in a while, and Reggie's a guy who's playing a lot better. Also, it's again we're sitting here cheerleading like we talked about at the beginning of the podcast. But what are you going to say? They're playing really well at this point.
Well, there's not a lot to not talk well about in a 45-0 win.
Yeah.
Let's do this. I think we gave the defense the love that they deserved. I do want to say we didn't talk a ton about the D-line, but they did play really well. They did force that basically lead to that interception for Dax.
And let me point out some numbers. Dax played 44 or 45 snaps. Nobody else on defense played more than 34 snaps. 25 total players took defensive snaps for Tech on Saturday. So they shut out Georgia Tech without breaking a sweat. So they should be fresh going into Pitt. It's kind of the same thing on offense. I think Nestor played 51 snaps, which was the most of anybody, but 30 different players took a snap on offense for Virginia Tech. So it should be a pretty healthy football team.
That is so valuable because, as we've talked about before, there are 2 ways in which you can 2 underappreciated ways to build a program. One of them is to go to bowl games every year because that means you get extra practices. You get developmental time with some of your younger guys in that month, whereas other teams have to quit practicing. And then the other one is blow teams out and get your backups in there. And you might think to yourself, oh, the game was out of hand. That's not really what it's about. It's about getting actual game film on your guys and being able to sit down with some of your backups and go through plays, that were done in an actual game, even if the game was a blowout.
Right. And Tech's backups did not treat that game like it was a blowout. They kept
they wanted to
hard.
preserve the shutout. That
Absolutely.
was the one thing that I observed watching that game was that they wanted to get the goose egg.
That was really important.
So let's do this. Let's transition to the offense. We still have a lot to get to today on the Tech Sideline podcast presented by the Fisher Law Firm. Continue to break down the Georgia Tech game. We'll highlight wrestling, men's basketball, recruiting for football. We'll get to your questions. We've got a lot to get to. Jump to offense. Everyone wants to talk about the quarterbacks. Let's talk about Hendon Hooker. Listen, he was efficient through the air. 9 of 13, 159 yards and a touchdown on the ground. Under 10 carries, 7 attempts for only 10 yards, but he did have 2 touchdowns on the ground, including that 4th down run up the middle. When you evaluate Hooker, I'm not going to call him a game manager. I don't think that's right. I mean, he can clearly go out and perform well. But what I mean by that is he knows how to manage a game. I feel like watching him. He just has control of the offense. He knows his spots. He knows his team's strengths. And, I mean, to me, he's the perfect, ideal candidate for a quarterback. He has a grasp of what's going on.
Yeah, he's in his 3rd year now. And, that's when the light theoretically should go on, particularly for a guy like him who did come from a quarterback background in high school. Should be ready by now, and he is. And it was another impressive performance, but just the fact that he is physically on the field. I wrote this after the Wake Forest game when he actually didn't have a particularly good game against Wake Forest, but just his mere presence is a major threat. I mean, Georgia Tech was so befuddled by that screen game. I put a screenshot in my article yesterday of James Mitchell with the ball, and he's got Brian Hudson and Luke Tenuta in front of him, leading him down the sideline. And there's no Georgia Tech defender in front of him.
Around.
Like they ran sprints down the sideline for 30 yards before there was a Georgia Tech defender. And that's how much that play fooled Georgia Tech. And there was another one to Mitchell earlier in the game where he and Keene were both wide open. And, Mitchell caught it, and then Keene turned up the field to block, and there was nobody there.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just – they just had Georgia Tech so confused from start to finish, really, it seemed like. And like 461 yards and 45 points. It could have been 600 yards and 60 points.
They took their foot off the gas halfway through the third quarter.
Exactly. It could have been even worse than it was.
By the way, how about Quincy Patterson coming in? A couple of moments where they needed him off the bench, converting the third down, 2 of 2 passing, 64 yards.
I think when he came in, a couple things about that play that one play where he came in. The word was that back when Ryan Willis was still starting for Tech and playing for Tech, the word was that Hendon Hooker had a bad shoulder, non-throwing shoulder, and you can see he's got the brace high on his left arm. And that has not been an issue until Saturday. Yeah. I think it popped out, and he goes out.
I think that's what it was.
I think it's exactly what it was, and they went out and they worked on him. But if you want a play that encapsulates the entire game, Quincy Patterson comes in, and what do you think he's going to do? You think he's going to run up the middle? It's 3rd and 8, and what does he do? He runs up the middle for a first down. You just kind of shake your head and go, come on, Georgia Tech.
Well,
really?
Georgia Tech, look at their formation, how they lined up. They lined up ready to defend the pass.
Did they really?
Oh yeah, there was a huge gap there.
Yikes!
And he just ran right through it. He might have had an option and said, okay, depending on how they line up, you just throw it deep to the outside or you run it up the middle. Those are your two choices. Yeah. And they were able to get one of those linemen, about 10 yards off the line of scrimmage, but there was a big gap there that he ran right through, and you could tell that they thought there was going to be a pass. For some reason, I don't know if it didn't.
Maybe they just didn't notice I don't know.
Maybe it didn't get communicated in time that Quincy Patterson was coming into the game. I don't know.
But I think Hendon actually sat on the field for a little bit.
He did.
It wasn't like he trotted off and
he did.
Okay.
So let's transition from the quarterbacks to the receivers. Someone I really want to I say receivers. I'm going to talk about who caught passes because technically James Mitchell is a tight end. As you said, they'll line him up in the slot. They'll line him up as a receiver. But I want to ask you guys about him. And I remember as I was writing the questions for this week, I remember back to our spring game podcast. I asked you guys who was the MVP of the spring game. One of you guys said it was James Mitchell. There's a lot of hype about him, Southwest Virginia guy, what he can do. How does he change an offense? What makes him different from a typical tight end?
Well, these days, I think what makes him different from a prototypical tight end in the general sense is, he's not your hand-in-the-ground blocker type. He is a guy that you can line up at multiple positions. But I think the definition of tight end has changed through the day. So I do consider him in the modern era of football to be a typical tight end. Okay. I think that's how tight ends are used these days.
And we knew this was a strength for Virginia Tech going into the season, that they had tight ends of all different flavors. They had some receivers. They have a couple blockers. They have whatever they need, and when you can send two guys out in the pattern, Keene and Mitchell, and they're both wide open, those are good toys to have to play around with. To me, they don't. I always go back to that 2010 Orange Bowl where Stanford just shredded Virginia Tech. Stanford had all their and Chris, you can maybe yay or nay on this. To me, Stanford's tight ends all looked the same. They were all big, strong guys who could run and catch.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's funny. James Mitchell's listed at something like 250. Yeah. He doesn't look 250 to me.
Doesn't really look it.
Yeah. He looks to me like a really 225, 230. I'm not saying, I don't believe the what's listed, but I was watching him run on one of those receptions, and I thought, man, that guy looks like a big wide receiver.
Which is what he is.
Yeah.
Right.
Even Drake Dulius had a monster pancake in yesterday's game on a Caleb Stewart run down the right-hand side. And if you watch it, I thought it was Keene. But when you look at the replay, you could see that it's 89. Yeah. And he just flattened the dude, man. Just drove him 10 yards downfield and flattened
That's 4 tight ends right there we've talked about. Now, Julius, Gallo.
Or no, it might have been. Maybe it was 86 instead of 89. Yeah. I'd have to go back and take a closer look. But at any rate, some tight end that doesn't play very much came in and pancaked somebody.
Well, I was worried that Dulius was seriously hurt when he was down on the field for a little while, but saw him in later, so that's good.
And the last thing I want to talk about, if there, we'll start off the podcast. So, we're not trying to cheerlead here. We're trying to find, to look at it objectively. I do want to pose this question. This might not be a big deal at all. This could be something to think about. The last 2 weeks, a receiver has led the team in rushing.
Right.
McLeese, 11 carries, 34 yards this week against Georgia Tech. Didn't go above and beyond like he has the last couple weeks, last week against Wake Forest. Is that a cause for concern at all?
No.
Or do you think the offense is clicking so well with the jet sweeps, it doesn't really matter who's running the football?
I think the more you can put on film to make defensive coordinators have to coach their team during the week, the better it is, I think. The best offenses are able to stretch a defense vertically and horizontally. And those screens and those end arounds and those reverses are showing that Virginia Tech is big-time lethal at stretching defenses horizontally right now. They're not elite at stretching teams vertically at this point, but at the same time, they can still do it. They hit the deep ball for a touchdown against UNC. They hit the deep ball to Trey Turner the other day. They also missed on another deep ball to Turner. If they'd hit that one, then you're really talking about, oh man, they can beat you vertically and horizontally. Right now, they're really good at beating you side to side. They're maybe slightly above average beating you vertically, but they can do both, and that's what makes them a dangerous offense. That's what makes UNC such a dangerous offense, because they can get you side to side with the running game, and they hit you with verticals down the field in the passing game, and that just makes it a lot of space to cover.
I don't think at this point, and we'll see how the next two games play out. I don't think at this point you're going to stop Virginia Tech's lateral running game and the inside running game. You're going to have to pick one or the other, And on Saturday, the lateral running game was working, and the up the middle with the tailback wasn't working. I thought it worked fairly well with the quarterbacks, especially in the red zone.
Hokies 45-0 winners over the Yellow Jackets. Virginia Tech is going bowling for a 27th consecutive year. Again, we everyone wants to bring up this Duke game, and rightfully so, as kind of like a marking point at the season, and an opportunity to kind of reflect on where this team is now from that Duke game. I mean, there was a lot of talk after that 45-10 home loss to the Blue Devils.
We weren't cheerleading that podcast, were we?
No, not at all.
We were picking our words very carefully.
When you guys think about getting to 7 wins right now, I mean, we sat there after that Duke game and analyzed the schedule, what the path to 7 wins would be for this team. Now at 7-3 and a chance at the Orange Bowl, can you just put into perspective how impressive a job it has been by this entire team to rally like they've had and gotten to this position?
Yeah, everything has to happen right. You've got to be able to rally the troops in a situation like that, right? If they need rallying, maybe they didn't. Without being in there, it's really hard to say. But you got to make all the right decisions as far as what you tell the team, who you put in at quarterback. You have to have recruited the right guys to be able to handle that loss and be able to respond positively when you start giving them tougher practices the very next day, because players wouldn't necessarily respond well to that. It takes the right kind of player. Go out there and lose by 35, and then the next day you're having one of your toughest practices of the season. So I think it's extremely difficult to get back. And it's one thing if it was like a 2-game mini slump. We've seen Virginia Tech start 0-2 and then win 10 games in a row before. But you look back at those teams, like the 2010 team, you're like, okay, they let Boise State beat them twice. This is a much better team than their 0-2 record says. This time it lasted 4 games. There was a blowout loss at home involved, and the record was 2-2. Basically, the slump lasted a whole month. You didn't know that they were better at that point. There was no evidence that they were. So from that standpoint, it makes this turnaround very unique in Virginia Tech history, I think.
And I said probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, I said something like, we thought the offseason narrative was malcontent's gone, improved locker room chemistry, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that we all thought that meant they'd be a better football team. And four games into the season, they weren't. And perhaps the value in finally having better chemistry is to be able to stay together and deal with adversity and rebound. And, I wasn't sure if Fuente could do that. We'd seen Frank Beamer do it a number of times, but we weren't sure if Fuente could do that. And we were very careful last week, or I was very careful to write last week. There's still more games to be played. There's still 3 more. Well, there's still 2 more. But the evidence is mounting that they're not going to go out and lay an egg effort-wise, and that's the big thing. Being a young team, I mean, who knows what's going to happen since they're a young team. I always it's such a great time of year because it's a great and sad time of year because this is my favorite time of year when you're in the middle of it in November and you don't know what's going to happen and you got that feeling in the pit of your stomach, but they've turned things around and you're like, are they going to go 9-3 or are they going to go 7-5? I love this time of year, but it's also sad because 2 weeks from now we're going to know and it's going to be over. They might still have an ACC championship game to play, so from that standpoint it's not over. But the story will be pretty much told just 2 weeks from now, and then you got 9 months of sitting around waiting for the next season, So those are just kind of my thoughts.
Enjoy the moment, right?
Yeah. Enjoy that feeling and enjoy watching them from week to week. And the fact that Saturday's game is the last home game in Lane and it matters is good enough for me. I know from watching the action on our StubHub account, we're a StubHub affiliate. And it was really busy yesterday.
I bet it was.
People are looking for tickets.
Yeah, and I want to point this out. The first half of the Wake Forest game and the first half of the Duke game were fairly identical halves. I thought Virginia Tech outplayed Duke for the most part.
In that first quarter especially.
Especially the first quarter. They definitely outplayed Wake Forest, but they went into halftime both those games losing. And then what happened in the second half of both of those games? Yeah. Completely different, right? So how this team responds to adversity right now is just completely different than how it responded to adversity earlier in the season.
Great way to take us to break here on the Tech Sideline Podcast. And recapping Georgia Tech, we've got a lot more to get to here on this Monday morning, as well as getting to your questions on Facebook Live. Let's step aside for a timeout. When we come back, rapid fire questions for Will and Chris before Facebook Live questions. This is the Tech Sideline Podcast presented by the Fisher Law Firm. Welcome back aboard the Tech Sideline Podcast presented by the Fisher Law Firm. Malcolm Stewart behind the scenes producing on the podcast.
I pointed at the camera.
Oh, there we go. We've got Malcolm Stewart behind the scenes producing the podcast. We've got Chris Coleman, managing editor on the set. We've got the founder and head honcho, Will Stewart. I am the podcast host, Evan Hughes. Glad everyone's with us. Recording on Monday morning, November the 18th. All right, I've got lots of topics to get to. I want to spend about 10 minutes combined on this, then we'll get to the Facebook Live questions because I know Mondays are very busy days for you guys. Let's start with football recruiting. I want to start with some big news that came out late last week, and that is that 4-star quarterback Dematrius Davis commits to Virginia Tech, a 5'11", 190-pounder from North Shore High School in Houston, Texas, one of the top dual-threat quarterbacks in the class of 2021. Chris, how big of a verbal is that?
It's a pretty big one, assuming he goes through with it and signs and everything like that. Yeah, most guys do. I'm not saying that he's not.
Yeah, he's a long way away, and there's a lot of time between.
He's a high school junior. Yeah. Now, I'd like to see him grow an inch or two. He's got some technique worker in the passing game. I don't think right now his technique allows him to take advantage of all of his arm strength and everything like that. Right. But he can run.
Man, he can run.
And the big thing is he runs a very similar offense to Virginia Tech's. He's already got an understanding of the read option. He's already got an understanding of RPO decision making. So from a scheme fit standpoint, this is an A+.
Yeah, he takes his snaps from the shotgun. I saw a lot of read option in his highlights, and I think I even saw an RPO. I saw a run pass option.
We saw the same thing.
Yeah.
And I thought I heard something. Of course, high school football in Texas is such a big deal. He competes in the highest classification in Texas,
6A,
and there is some. I don't have the stat in front of me, but they are like ridiculously good. He does not lose at that level.
Yeah. They play a very high level of competition. They won the state championship last year when he threw kind of a Hail Mary to win the game. Crazy stuff. And we're also Virginia Tech is also bringing in a 4-star running back from Texas on a visit this weekend who was friends with Davis.
Yeah.
Which leads me to my next point.
Brandon
Campbell from Pearland, Texas. 5'10", 190-pounder. He's got offers from a bunch of big-time schools. So
I don't know. I haven't watched his film, so I don't know anything about him.
I just know he's a 4-star guy.
There's a 4-star guy from Texas that has a good-looking offer list.
Yeah.
At the very least, it's good for perception,
Yes.
considering what's going on with the 2020 class. The 2020 class will end up being better than people think right now because they're going to go in at the end, and there's a good chance they pick up the number 1 prep school prospect in the country.
At running back, right?
Wide receiver.
Slot
receiver type. They're gonna see which coaches get fired and pick off some commits and things like that. So it'll end up being better than it looks right now.
So one thing that we've talked about, this 2020 recruiting class for Virginia Tech, a little bit down, but as you've said, defensively tough to recruit when a lot of these guys did not know who their defensive coordinator was going to be, a new coach coming in, potentially a new scheme. But it does look like things are trending upwards for 2021, 2022, and beyond.
Certainly in the very early stages, it looks good for 2021. And I think getting Davis's commitment, if you looked on Twitter and you saw the responses from a lot of other 2021 and 2022 recruits, they were all very impressed. Like, recruits notice where other recruits commit and where highly touted guys commit. So that's good for perception.
And it helps. It's very important. Davis has committed, and Virginia Tech next weekend, the very next game, blows out Georgia Tech 45-0. Keep winning. Keep making that commitment look like a smart commitment.
Right, and it's important to get it in this early because if you think about it, Dax Holyfield was a highly touted kid, but he didn't sign until the very end.
Yeah.
Devin Hunter, top 75 kid, but didn't commit until the last week of the recruiting process. So Virginia Tech didn't have a chance to use those guys to influence other recruits in their respective classes. They can do that with Davis.
Rapid fire, we move on to Virginia Tech men's basketball. Hokies, since the last time we've done a podcast, knocked off USC Upstate on Wednesday, and an impressive win over Lehigh on Saturday just before the football game. Lehigh was a team that won over 20 games last year in the Patriot League. Landers Nolly continues to score 20-plus in those 2 games. What are you thinking right now, Chris?
There was a point on Saturday where he just ran off those 3 straight 3-pointers, and wow, man! I mean, that dude can fill it up. I think Lehigh represented their biggest challenge in their first 5 games outside Clemson, a team that's won 20 in 2 of their last 3 years.
79-53 final score.
Yeah, and it's a little bit deceiving. That was a 5-point game at halftime, and it was even close into the early stage of the second half before Tech ran away with it. But once they ran away with it, there was no stopping.
Nolly with 27 against Lehigh. PJ Horn had 14, and the Hokies from deep were 9 of 18 from 3 in the second half.
Second half, yeah.
Yeah,
it wasn't great for them in the first half, but they
14 of 37 for the game, I think. That's a lot of 3-pointers.
That's a lot of 3-pointers.
And then against USC Upstate, Will, they started a little bit slow on Wednesday, but then the second half they really started to cruise.
I thought USC Upstate played a good game. I thought they shot poorly, but I thought they
got a lot of good coaches down there.
Well, yeah, that's right. They got Stacy Palmore,
he's a former assistant at Virginia Tech who recruited some good players under Seth Greenberg. He was actually Michael Vick's high school basketball coach.
Wow.
There's your trivia.
Wow.
And they got Ron Bradley, who used to be the head coach at Radford. So for a small school, they've got a pretty accomplished coaching staff.
They've got another assistant in there. I forget who it was that I'd heard of.
But I thought it reflected on their play on the court. I thought they put some pressure on Tech. They just didn't shoot well, and I thought Virginia Tech responded with just tremendous effort. And so far, that's what we're seeing out of them under Mike Young. Just effort, game in, game out.
Yeah.
I did not get to watch the Lehigh game, so I can't speak to that one.
There's gonna be one more tune-up.
Wednesday, Delaware State, they are struggling this year, to put it politely.
Yes, they're a struggling team. So Virginia Tech is going to be 5-0 going into Maui. Really, their only chances to lose basketball games were Clemson and Lehigh.
Yep.
And they won those. They'll beat Delaware State, be 5-0 headed into Maui, and playing Michigan State, a team that was preseason number 1.
And I think it's currently number 3 last I checked.
Yeah, that'll be a different kind of challenge. And then the next day, either Georgia or Dayton. You got 3 games against tough teams 3 straight days.
I think the only thing that would disappoint me is 0-3. I think I'd be satisfied with winning a game out there.
I know Michigan State is awesome. I don't know as much about those other teams.
Yeah.
Georgia's got one of the top players in the country, top freshman. It was a big signing for Tom Crean. I want to say the number one player, but like big time recruit, 5-star. Dayton's got
they're always a solid
VCU
program.
coach whose name Anthony
Tech,
Grant.
yeah, like assuming Tech loses to Michigan State, I don't think they'll be favored against either opponent they would face in day 2 either. And I'm not as familiar with the other side of the bracket to have a good idea of who they could face on day 3, but it's going to be a tough field. And you get back from Maui and you immediately play Duke.
Yeah.
Okay, let's transition to this. Quickly, do want to, again, hit on women's basketball. Off to a good start for Kenny Brooks and company this year, 3-0. Liberty, an underrated team. Hokies pulling out 73-69 on Friday. This center, Elizabeth Kitley, someone to keep an eye on. A big-time recruit they got. Kenny Brooks said that he has a post presence inside for the first time since he's been there. They still make a lot of three-pointers. It's a fun team to watch over there with women's hoops.
Yeah. What'd she score, 27?
Against Liberty, give me 2 seconds.
I think it was like in the upper 20s. It was Landers Nolly line.
It was Landers Nolly line. Kitley ended up scoring against the Flames. Let's see. She had only 10. It was Asia Shepard who had 20.
She had 27 in some game.
It was against St. Francis to open up the season.
The season.
It was 13 of 15 from the field.
Yeah, wow.
So off to a good start there. Just want to update. And then finally, I wanted to save this part for last. We can spend about 3 minutes on this. Virginia Tech wrestling ranked 11th in the country on the road, going to number 3 Ohio State. Again, one of the blue bloods of wrestling, if you will, and a 21-15 decision over the Buckeyes. One of the best wins in Tech history. Just another check off the box for Coach Roby and his staff.
Yeah, WrestleStat, you can do dual matchups and see how they're projected. It's really cool. You go to WrestleStat and you pick, I think it's called the dual meet function, and so in matching up Ohio State against Virginia Tech going in, they were predicting a 25-10 Ohio State win. But as we talked about on the podcast, 3 of those matches were close. They were 1-point decisions projected for Ohio State. So, I put it out on Tech Sideline's Twitter. I said, this is not this could go Virginia Tech's way. What's most interesting about that is Virginia Tech wound up winning 21-15.
Correct.
That was with David McFadden, their best wrestler, losing.
Correct.
And Roby said after the meet, he said, if you had told me that David McFadden was going to lose and we were still going to win, he said, I can't believe we did that. So it went about as well as it could go for him. Outside of McFadden, it went as well as it could go.
Think about this. Brent Moore at 149 really struggled against Northwestern with a pin over the 8th-ranked wrestler, Sammy Sasso, in a minute 16. That was absolutely vital for them.
I got to go back and watch that, man.
Yeah, Brent Moore. Coach Roby said we need Brent to basically wrestle better.
He pressured him after Northwestern.
Yeah. Cody Hughes at a 174, 6'3" decision.
And I think that was a big upset for Hughes.
And Joey Prada with a 5-2 decision over the 20th ranked wrestler at 125. Colin Girardi, the young freshman at 133, 7-1 decision over 14th ranked Quinn Kinner. He was 13th, so that was a toss-up. That is a big win for the Hokies to go into Big Ten country. And then one thing I didn't realize that you brought up earlier about the recruiting class. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes. So first of all, one more comment on Ohio State. If you want to know a little bit about Big Ten wrestling, Google Ohio State wrestling facility. And they have their own practice facility, and secondly, they compete in a really neat arena that is purpose built for 4 sports: wrestling, women's volleyball. I don't remember the other 2, but it's a really neat venue. It's brand new, So if you want to see Big Ten money at work, just Google Ohio State wrestling facilities and take a look. So it's great to go into that setting. I read 11 Warriors is an Ohio State site. I read their preview of the match, and they were just like, "Hey, Virginia Tech's got." They gave Virginia Tech respect, but they basically said this shouldn't be a problem. And I'm pretty sure that place was full for that meet. So
I saw some pictures. It looked packed.
I really want to go back and watch that.
Hokies have Navy coming up at the Navy Classic in Annapolis, and I want to go back and watch that Brent Moore pin for sure.
So Tech has beaten. They're 3-0 with 3 wins over ranked teams, right?
Correct.
Yes, Northwestern was number 9.
Missouri.
Excuse me, Missouri was number 9. Northwestern was number 21. I mean, Tech should have won that and did. And
right. That was actually the one that was closest, right? The Northwestern match was pretty close. It was decided late.
Yeah,
correct.
Yeah, but man, these wrestling programs don't mess around, do they?
No.
There's no FCS opponent in the early season to warm you up, right? They go right into it.
So in the preview I read on 11 Warriors, they had some quotes from Ohio State's coach where, I mean, they laid out Ohio State's schedule. It's crazy, and we've talked about this on the podcast. Wrestlers, they don't mess around. They love wrestling against the best. And so we were talking about the cross country meet way earlier in the podcast. Cross country, it's all about the state meet. Yeah, they compete all year, but you're really just gearing up for the state meet. And in wrestling, you're gearing up for the NCAA tournament. I mean, yes, you have to qualify, you have to get there, so you can't just nonchalant the regular season. But man, wrestlers love that stuff.
A couple things that I'm curious about, not to get too far ahead for this wrestling program. First of all, they're ranked 11th, right? They just beat number 3 Ohio State on the road. Curious to see where they're going to be ranked this week. You'd have to assume, gosh, they got to be top 7, top 6. I mean, with the resume they're built. Unfortunately, Missouri did lose this week, so that win still looks good, but just it would have been. But and then you look at down the road for them. I mean, Navy is traditionally a strong wrestling school but they're not ranked right now. Then Chattanooga, Central Michigan.
These are invitationals, right? They're not dual meets.
Well, no. So they are going to the Navy Classic, but I believe that they are going to wrestle Navy in a duel. I believe. Okay. Could be wrong on that.
Because I think Jake Lyman wrote in our write-up that's Virginia Tech's last dual meet for a while.
Then Chattanooga, December 21st at home. Central Michigan's got a good program. West Virginia, Binghamton, and then Cornell, who they wrestled extremely tough last year.
Yeah.
And then they get into ACC play, and there's no reason to think that Virginia Tech's not a favorite to win the ACC right now.
ACC wrestling's just getting so much better, though.
It is.
NC State in particular is recruiting well.
UNC, I mean.
So that segues into recruiting. Virginia Tech signed the number 2 recruiting class in the country by, I believe those are Flow Wrestling's rankings. And this is on the heels of signing the number 4 class last year. So from a recruiting standpoint, Tony Roby's got it going on. And the program continues to build momentum. Like any program, it's going to take a while for all this to bear fruit, and they don't have Mekhi Lewis this year. Hopefully he'll be back. I like the direction things are going.
Right.
What can you say? Here we are cheerleading again, but it's phenomenal.
I stand corrected. I'm getting a text from my cousin who wrestled at Navy. It is a tournament. It is not a duel.
There you go.
Thank you, Craig Futch. Really appreciate it. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's dive into some Facebook Live questions. That was rapid fire. We did a pretty good job there, guys.
Probably not quite as rapid as you had in mind.
Yeah. No, it's okay. Let's throw it over to the best producer in the land, Malcolm Stewart. What's going on today, Malcolm?
How's it going? All right. I'm on the couch now.
Oh, okay.
Let's start with Charles Bowman's question. Which has made a bigger impact in the middle of the season? Offensive running game or defensive front 7 penetration?
That's a good question.
I think the running game.
Yes.
Yes. But yeah, either way, either one's a solid answer. I think Tech's defensive tackles are just playing at a really, really high level right now, particularly Deshaun Crawford. So good to have him back healthy. Nerel Pollard, I think he missed his 3rd sack of the season.
Oh, I know. He went running around.
I know he had 2 against UNC, and I think he's got a couple more here or there, but he's missed 3. Like, his tackling grade on PFF is really bad because he's missing all these sacks.
Yeah.
But once he puts on 10 pounds of muscle in the offseason, he will make every single one of those.
And works on his technique and all that stuff.
But I think the running game, just when you can run the football, it's obvious how much better Virginia Tech's passing game is when they can run the football. And when Virginia Tech's offense is actually working and on the field, and the defense doesn't have to go out on the field after a whole bunch of 3-and-outs and things like that, it just makes the whole team better. Makes the defense fresher, makes the passing game better. I think Justin Fuentes saying when he first got here was throw to score, run to win. And I think when they made the decision to start Ryan Willis at quarterback, they got away from that philosophy. Because if you really want to run to win, he was not the right option.
Mm-hmm.
Not that he can't run. He can run. He's a good runner. He just made the wrong decisions in the running game. So I think now that they have the right quarterback who's generally making the right decisions in the running game and it's opening everything up, I think they're back to their run-to-win mantra and throw to score. So I think that's made them a much better football team.
Yeah, I stick with my answer. Yes.
I like it.
All the above.
By the way, here's Ox's updated scoring streak.
Oh, look at that.
Okay, so Evan, read that for people who are just listening.
So this is the longest streak of games without being shut
games,
out.
yeah.
Yep, per the NCAA record book. Florida, 396 games. It's been 1988. This is the last time that happened. TCU in second, 343, 92. Last time that happened. The Hokies have not been shut out since 95. That's third, 319 games. Just behind them, Georgia, 314. That's also in 95. Nebraska, 305. That was in 96. Boise State, interesting, at 288 at 97. 1997, that is. Texas Tech as well, 280, 1997. And then Boomer Sooner, Oklahoma, 278 at 1998.
So Georgia Tech was previously on that list, and they are no longer on that list thanks to Bud Foster.
Well, yep, and thanks to Bud Foster. Now, to be fair, Temple's defense shut them out earlier this year.
Yeah.
Temple beat them 24-2.
But we were talking about that
Yep.
that 2001 Pitt game where
You're right.
Tech got shut out, but
Yep.
they scored on
They
a block.
They
field
scored
goal.
on a
Great
blocked
graphic
field goal,
there
right.
by Ox.
And you guys weren't alive the last time. 50% of this room was not alive the last time Virginia Tech didn't score in a football game.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I was alive either. I was in the stands for that, feeling pretty dead.
I was actually in the stands for that, and people complain about students and people leaving at halftime these days. Well, they didn't show up for the first quarter for that game. It was cold and rainy. And Tech had lost 4 of their last 5 games or something like that, and it wasn't pretty.
I will never forget sitting there watching that game with my good friend Glenn Bywater, who lives down in Florida now. And at that point in time, Virginia Tech had lost 3 out of 4 to end the 1994 season. They'd opened 95 with a loss and then lost to Cincinnati. They'd lost 5 out of 6 games.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget sitting there in the rain, and Glenn looks at me and goes, "When does basketball season start?" And said nobody for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
So I'll never forget that. That was miserable.
Malcolm and I have yet to witness a Virginia Tech shutout since we've been born. There you go.
Yeah.
Malcolm, what do we got next?
Let's see. There's a few questions regarding how poorly Georgia Tech played. I know you guys don't believe in the transitive property of football, but what can we measure by? We beat them by 45. UVA beat them by 5.
Actually,
were they really bad, or were we really good?
I do think Georgia Tech had a really bad game.
Yeah, I didn't think they played well, and I think once they realized they were going to get blown out, they probably checked out some mentally. Although when they got that sack when it was 31-0, they really celebrated like it was still a game. So maybe I'm wrong.
Celebrate
there.
the small things in life, Chris.
Yeah. Now that being said, their worst loss this year was to Clemson by 38.
The Citadel.
Point spread.
Gotcha.
As far as points, but yes,
I was debatable.
They did lose to the Citadel.
Citadel was definitely their worst loss.
But just last week they lost to UVA by 5. They lost to Pitt by 10. They beat Miami on the road. That was their last 3 games. So nobody's done to them this year what Tech did. Was some of that them maybe playing their worst game of the year? Possibly. I mean, 2.3 yards per play, I believe or 2.4 is like nowhere near.
They literally had one good offensive play that I recall, and that was the scramble by James Graham.
They had a play, maybe a 12-yard run up the middle late against the backups.
Yeah, and they made some.
Right. So it was just an awful day for them, and it's hard to say how much of that is them and how much of that is Tech. But they're not good, but they hadn't played absolutely horribly in their most recent games. But most of the evidence points to the way Virginia Tech's defense is just trending up, man.
Yeah.
I think. The North Carolina, the total yards against North Carolina and Notre Dame were deceiving because of the number of plays those teams ran. If you just look at it from a yards per play standpoint, Virginia Tech is up to 30th in the country now in defense in yards per play.
Statty, ready with the stats.
Exactly, and that was after some maybe some tough games earlier this season. But what they've done from a yards per play standpoint, I think this defense is they've transitioned. The beginning of the year, I think they were average. Now I think they're trending up into the very, very good status right now. Yeah. The Virginia. We'll talk about this more on Wednesday, but they're the most complete team in the ACC besides Clemson.
Who's that?
Virginia Tech.
Virginia Tech is. Offense, defense, and special teams. The PFF ratings have Virginia Tech's defense the third best defense in the ACC.
Wow. And is it Pittsburgh and Clemson ahead of them?
Yes. I believe those were the two that are ahead of them.
Real quick, and as you said,
barely.
As you said, special teams, it is now, it was announced, or I figured out yesterday that the punt, Oscar Bradburn leads the nation now in, what is it, punts?
Is it yards per punt?
Yards per punt.
Yeah.
Now
Really?
leads the nation. He was third.
He had another down inside the 5 the other day.
But he only averaged about 45 yards a kick, which means he lowered his average.
It's up to 48. Right?
Well, he was at 48.6 last week, and
he's at
for the season.
Well, he's 48.3 now, right? So everybody else, maybe somebody else had a bad day, or somebody had a block, or something.
Bottom line, the Ray Guy Award is in grasp for Oscar Bradburn.
He can feel it coming for sure. And by the way, Virginia Tech special teams ranked number 2 in the ACC on PFF. So you're talking about the defense number 3, special teams number 2.
And where's the offense?
The offense is only like number 7, but half of those stats are with Ryan Willis starting. Obviously, much different story now. I'm telling you, this is definitely the most complete team in the ACC besides Clemson.
For this game Saturday against Pitt.
We're gonna have a great podcast.
Pitt's got some scary players, man.
Pitt's got some scary players on defense, but they haven't beaten anybody by more than 10 this year, even like Ohio and the 1AA teams they faced.
I'm assuming they have some red shirts on defense, Chris.
I'm sure they do.
So I just had to make sure we got the red shirts in on. All right, let's get a couple more questions in, Malcolm. Anything else?
Yeah, from Doug Barnett. How does our young offensive line stand up against Pitt's D-line?
Not well.
Yeah,
probably not well.
We're gonna
get yourself ready for that.
We'll have to get some points against Pitt. I haven't studied Pitt. I don't know the name of a single Pitt defensive player. I
watched a lot of their game against UNC, and
I know collectively they're a physical defense. And like Virginia Tech, they have 2 standout cornerbacks that are really good.
And their D line's pretty phenomenal too.
Yeah,
they've got. They're invoking the name Aaron Donald to recruit defensive linemen.
Of course,
and nobody's walking around after signing day saying, "Oh, do you see that Pitt defensive line they signed?" But they're really good.
It's a bunch of blue collar guys that they recruit well.
And Chris is right.
Their type of players.
Tech is going to have to scheme some
space. But that's kind of what Tech is doing right now.
Right.
I mean, they've had to do that every game. I mean, you're not going to blow guys off the line of scrimmage with starting 3 freshmen on the offensive line. It's just not going to happen. So you've got to scheme your way to success to a certain extent, which is difficult when you face other good coaches. And Martin Narduzzi's apparently a pretty good coach. I think he's a good fit for Pitt.
Oh yeah.
I think they know who they are, and they don't try to be anybody else.
Listen, he was the defense coordinator at Michigan State when they were great on defense. There are some people, as having family went to Michigan State, that want him to replace Mark D'Antonio.
I can understand.
So, I mean, he is well respected up.
I could certainly understand that. Now, that being said, their offense is like the direct opposite of their defense. It's just very limited.
To continue the impromptu Pitt preview, their offense isn't what it used to be. They have a new offensive coordinator this year, Mark Whipple. Canada left. I can't remember where.
Canada. He left several years ago, right? He was only there for 1 year. He was there in like 2015, and that's it.
It's funny because when I was so I wonder who I'm thinking of.
No, he's a mercenary.
They're throwing the football a lot more. Let's cut to the chase. You're used to.
Well, they can't run it.
Right, you're used to Pitt running all over people. You're going to see them throwing a lot.
And their best wide receiver is apparently out this week also. Maurice French.
That's right. That's
2
right.
Fs.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna table this for right here because we have a great podcast on hand. I promise on Wednesday.
Okay.
And, all right, how about one more question, Malcolm? Then we'll wrap things up.
Yeah, we'll do one more from Chris Grella. In terms of recruiting with a younger team, is it better for the 2020 class to try and finish it off with high school kids or go harder at the transfer portal?
Yeah, I wouldn't go to the transfer portal. How many impact players are you going to have on the transfer portal? There's just not that many of them. And because they're transferring for a reason. right?
And where does Virginia Tech really need somebody right now?
I'd be more likely to get a JUCO if I could. And I don't know exactly how many JUCOs Tech is allowed to take from an academic standpoint. I don't think it's very many. And I mean that from like a athletic department standpoint. I've heard that they're only allowed to take a certain number, or they only allow themselves to take a certain number of, guys who struggled academically out of high school each year. So that means hardly any JUCOs. They've already got the commit from the running back. If they could find a natural pass rushing defensive end, whether it's a grad transfer, whether it's a JUCO, I would take that. But other than that, I think it's better. I would go high school, and this is the chance you get to redshirt guys, man. The whole team's coming back next year. You don't need a bunch of guys to play as freshmen next year. You can redshirt that whole class.
So pick the late bloomer. Look for the late bloomers, guys that aren't getting a lot of attention, but you think you can develop over time.
Yes,
and that fits your culture. And the culture's looks like the culture's really starting to take hold.
You know, I just realized what we missed out on when we did the podcast on Halloween. We should have had Chris in a red shirt.
Should have.
That would have been very, very fun.
Yes.
So
he's dressed up as a red shirt.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks to everybody for taking some time to drop the questions. Really appreciate. Always adds a really nice dynamic to the show. And if you didn't get yours answered, be sure to come back Wednesday as we preview Virginia Tech and Pitt with the Coastal on the line, with the Orange Bowl on the line. There's a lot on the line on Saturday in Lane Stadium. Chris, as I always do, what's coming up on TSL this week? What can our
I'm expecting Virginia Tech to announce basketball signings today.
Right.
So I've gotten most of a column written about that. Just ready to roll whenever Virginia Tech announces.
Joe, Bama Sill has already signed, and we're waiting for Darius Maddox to sign.
Right.
He's supposed to sign today.
So,
and where do those both rank? Are they pretty highly touted guys?
Bama Sill's like 65 in the country. Where's Maddox?
Bama Sill, depending on who you ask, is borderline top 50. Maddox is 80 to 90 range.
Okay.
So so two top guard prospects so far. They got to close the class out in the spring with a couple of bigs, because I don't think most people don't realize they consider Mike Young a guard-oriented coach, but he runs a traditional lineup. He wants a traditional power forward, and he wants a traditional center. And his offense is at its best when he has a traditional center.
Brent doesn't live here anymore. We're actually
it's total opposite. Yeah, he needs a traditional center. When Wofford went from being good to elite, it was last year when they had a center that was second on the team in assists and could score, rebound, and pass, dribble, and shoot, all that stuff. So he's got to get that squared away. That's the most important part of his recruiting. No question he's going to be able to recruit guards. All ACC teams can recruit guards. Come on.
Yeah.
How many teams out there do you see that have bad guards? Hardly any, right? Now you see teams that maybe might not be so sacked at 3, 4, and 5. So that's where it's going to be important for Mike Young, and this will be the difference in his tenure. And honestly, and this is the only thing that should concern you. When is the last time Virginia Tech has been able to consistently recruit 4s and 5s? Never.
Well, that goes way back to when I was a student.
Sure.
Everybody else had better centers than Virginia Tech.
Right. So Mike Young is going to have to do something that no other Virginia Tech coach has been able to do: consistently recruit 4s and 5s, particularly 5s, and that will decide his tenure.
Yeah.
Okay. Looking forward to that article. I'm sure you Monday thoughts.
Yep.
And.
Everything else like a normal week.
Normal week.
Yeah.
Just put it out there. It's going to be a busy week in Tech athletics. Men's basketball playing Delaware State on Wednesday. Of course, Tech and Pitt on Saturday. And we will have a full breakdown for you Wednesday morning right here on the Tech Sideline Podcast. Hope you can join us around 9:30. That's going to do it for our loaded podcast today. Guys, as always, really appreciate your time. And again, a reminder to follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, all at Tech Sideline. If you're watching this video, be sure to like and subscribe. For our terrific producer behind the scenes, Malcolm Stewart, our managing editor, Chris Coleman, our founder and head honcho, Will Stewart, I'm your podcast host, Evan Hughes, saying so long. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you on Wednesday, breaking down Tech and Pitt on the Tech Sideline Podcast, presented by the Fisher Law Firm.